Thanks a lot, Mr. Murillo. And the next speaker is Ms. Erzsebet Fitori coming from ECTA. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to share the views of challenger mobile operators. ECTA's mobile members are typically the entrant mobile operators, the new entrants to any given national mobile market, and also some of them are MVNO, so it is really their perspective that I would like to share with you on the Roam like at home scenario. I would like to address a few topics, specifically the time frame to get there, the fair use issue, wholesale regulation, and potential offers without including international roaming. At the outset, let me just say that ECTA and challenger mobile operators are supportive of the objective to abolish excessive roaming charges for end users, and we also are committed to create a positive end user experience for traveling consumers or end users. Therefore, we support a gradual path towards a Roam like at home scenario, but under competitive conditions which would enable all operators, not only large dominant firms, to effectively compete. With regard to the time frame to get there, we have looked at what type of time frame mobile operators would need in order to implement any new obligation, and it seems that they would need approximately 1.5 years to prepare their commercial offerings and also to make it adaptations to their IT systems. But in order to design these commercial offers, there needs to be clarity on wholesale regulation, ideally at the same time as the reader regulation, but at least approximately 1.5 years before the entry into force of a zero roaming surcharge regulation. We also recommend the progressive introduction of the Roam like at home obligation. Oh, sorry, wrong button. With regard to a fair use rule or fair use clause on international roaming services, we think that BEREC would be actually best placed to design a pretty basic fair use rule in order to prevent permanent or abusive roaming. And then on top of that basic fair use rule, competition should be promoted and enabled to provide choices for end users between different Roam like at home offers and with different fair use scenarios meeting the needs of the end users. And then, given that this is likely to be a quite dynamically developing market, BEREC should periodically review the appropriateness of that of the basic fair use rule that it has put in place. With regard to the wholesale level, I think one point that I would like to make is on the current structural solutions which are aimed at the separate sale of roaming services. The original objective of the structural solutions was to introduce price competition in roaming services and thereby to drive lower and more competitive roaming prices. But if roaming surcharges are basically being phased out by law, then the structural solutions for the separate sale of roaming services are redundant. And any investments made by mobile operators in introducing these structural solutions are also unnecessary and redundant. Therefore, the obligation on structural solutions for the separate sale of roaming services should be deleted simultaneously with the introduction of the roam like at home obligation. With regard to the wholesale tariffs, there is unanimity within the ECTA membership that the regulation of retail roaming charges should be always accompanied by appropriate wholesale tariff regulation, and also that there should be clarity on the level of applicable wholesale tariffs at least 1.5 years prior to the entry into force of the zero roaming surcharge retail principle. We agree, I think, with the remark that was made by BEREC that the harmonization, that MTRs play a very important role in this regard, and we think that the harmonization of MTRs leading ultimately to a single European MTR cap is basically a prerequisite to achieve successfully the roam like at home scenario. Now, on the level of the wholesale tariffs or wholesale caps, most challenger operators, MNOs and MVNOs within ECTA support the reduction of wholesale caps for voice, SMS, and data roaming at the same time as the retail principle of zero roaming surcharges is introduced in order to ensure that all operators are able to provide roam like at home offers. However, some challenger MNOs, in particular with a South European footprint and high volumes of inbound roaming traffic, consider that the current level of regulated wholesale charges are appropriate. And my final point is that there could be potentially offers which do not include international roaming services. In some markets, extremely low-cost offers have been developed, and these seem to be demanded actively by end users. Typically, these are not used for international roaming today and do not support a business case for roam like at home. I'm thinking in particular at offers like, for example, in the French market, I think there are the €2 or €5 offers. So I think it would be quite useful to have offers up to a predefined, very small amount per month that would not be required to include international roaming services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erzsebet, and thank you, Fatima, for keeping us alert so that we are not falling asleep. I have to say that a long time ago when I was a student and had been reading quite a lot for an exam and went to see a movie. So I fell asleep, and in that movie, so there was a bomb explosion, and the effect was similar to the one that we just experienced here. But okay, so we will now have the next speaker, so Mr. Francesco Versace from ETNO, who will elaborate on the ETNO views on roaming. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much again. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm pleased to note that my presentation has substantially been anticipated by some of my colleagues here. So first thing, I will try to keep it short. And second, I would like to say that I think this is a positive sign because it signals an alignment, a deep alignment within the industry, at least on some important points, which I will now try to address. The first point I'd like to raise is the point regarding legal certainty, which was raised by Jorge as well before. Roaming free entered into force 2 years ago. The decoupling obligations entered into force only last July. it's clearly a tight time, and we believe that more time would be needed to assess these solutions and these measures. We should also consider that the market has evolved very much since, and we have had a variety of new offers, for example, with bundle service with roaming services in it, and domestic roaming services at domestic price levels in return for a fixed fees. So we think that roaming free should have the chance to follow its due course and respect the timing foreseen for its review and glide path regarding retail roaming charges. But if a revision is to be made and towards a roam like at home scenario, we think that some preconditions should necessarily be met. The first point is about timing. As it was said before, the implementation of roam like at home will be extremely complex. As far as both legislative and guidelines measures are concerned, but also as far as technical implementation from the operator's side is concerned. It's necessary that implementation comes after enough time after the definition of the relevant fair use criteria and the definition of eventual intervention on wholesale markets. And we believe that an implementation period of between 1 year and 18 months should be respected. And in this period, we also believe that for consultation with stakeholders should continue, and any measures taken with regard to fair use and wholesale should be accompanied by a proper and thorough impact assessment. The other point is regarding decoupling obligations, and as it was said before, again, if roam like at home is introduced, there is no need whatsoever to maintain in place decoupling obligations such as single IMSI and LBO, which are intended to achieve the same goals which an abolition of retail roaming surcharges would inherently achieve. So we very much agree with BEREC's preliminary assessment that these obligations should be removed once and if roam like at home is enters into force. Of course, as clearly pointed out in BEREC's analysis, there is the need to mitigate the side effects of roam like at home on competitive domestic markets, including, of course, the potential waterbed effects and avoiding the risk of permanent roaming. And for these fair use policies at retail side are definitely needed. And it's important to design carefully their definition, and also to, again, stress this, to foresee an adequate implementation period. Some characteristics that we think these fair use policies should have are as follows. They should be flexible and, although defined at the EU level, flexible enough to adapt to separate tariff structures and to allow operators in different national contexts for a degree of flexibility. They should be simple and understandable by end-use consumers, and they should be easy to implement and not place an unnecessary burden to operators. Finally, regarding the wholesale market, we share the concerns raised in BEREC's preliminary assessment, and we share very much the underlying principle that's mentioned at some point, that in any case, any intervention on the wholesale market should ensure that any operators is able, whether a visited or domestic network, is able to recover costs and investments. And the introduction of roam like at home and the accompanying definition of possible new interventions in wholesale market and fair use should definitely not be done in a way that it has the effect of disincentivized investment in networks. So we think that we very much value the work done so far by BEREC. We think that this report that's being circulated is extremely interesting, and also it helps understand how complex the problem is. And although very politically sensitive, we think that this debate on roaming should be approached in a very informed and technical way in order to avoid harms to consumers and to operators. And of the questions raised by BEREC, we can say already now that we very much share their position on timing and on the removal of decoupling obligations. We will do our best to reply in the short time allowed for the consultation with regard to the questions on fair use and wholesale in our best possible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Mr. Versace. And the next intervention will come from Mr. Guillermo Beltrà, and that is the consumer's viewpoint. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will continue to use my freedom of choice to speak from here. Hope that's okay. Thanks also once again to BEREC for asking our views on this important consumer issue. Everything I'm about to say comes with a little disclaimer that since this is an ongoing debate and many different approaches have raised throughout the political process on the Connected Continent proposal, we are on the process of discussing with our own membership, our own national or consumer organizations, what our detailed views are on many of these issues. So what I would like to do is just give some initial reactions to the things that we're talking about today, with the disclaimer that those might be completed once we have more discussions in-house. The first comment I'd like to make is not on content, it's really on the process, because BEREC's paper says that what we're being presented today as a preliminary non-formal BEREC position paper as well is based on input received from stakeholders. And we've been talking about this morning about how transparent BEREC is. So I would like to ask, would it be possible to know what stakeholders? To my knowledge, BEUC has not been consulted. We have not been consulted in the preparation of this paper, and now I just learned today there's just 1 week to submit written comments to it. And I hope you understand that for stakeholders like us, where we are very strained in terms of resources, that's quite unachievable. So that's a pity that we were not allowed to comment earlier. Now, one of the things that BEREC acknowledges, and there we would agree, is that there are different interpretations of roam like at home, and one of them could include cross-border services while roaming. So what happens when a consumer is roaming and communicates with a third country that is not either his home country or his visited country? For me, this is a great example of why these two issues go hand in hand. If we're really talking about creating a single market, then we have to tackle both issues, not just the roaming issue. Another issue that I see is not being addressed, and we've been highlighting this since the beginning of the, let's call it, roaming 4 debate, is the issue of untapped demand. If we effectively create roam like at home tariffs, which are either limited by our fair use criteria or only applicable to some consumers and so on, there is the chance that there will be more demand for the services that now consumers can use also while they're traveling. Because like Mr. White was saying before, for example, many of us just simply deactivate roaming while we travel. If I had a roam like at home plan, I wouldn't do that. And I would possibly, during that month or during those days, then contribute to using more and more services from my operator. That is a demand, and a potential untapped demand that has to be quantified somehow. And I just don't see that we're talking about that enough. We would agree with previous speakers that we don't see how we can effectively create sustainable roam like at home plans without talking about wholesale caps and reducing wholesale caps. It is our understanding that it is the smaller and more challenging operators in the market that have dynamized the market, that have brought prices down, and we would not obviously want to see that level of competition being strangled because the difference between the retail cap and the wholesale cap gets reduced, or even goes negative if Roam Like at Home is inserted without reducing wholesale caps. On the issue of MTRs, that's something we do not take a concrete position on, but I would ask all of you to reflect on what can be done to harmonize them if that helps, not just reduce wholesale caps, but also reduce wholesale costs for everybody. Now, it's the end of the day, and I think we take a very special position on this debate, so you'll allow me to be a bit provocative. If we're really talking about creating a single market, then what's the whole point in fair use policies? If we're talking about a single market for consumers, it should mean Roam Like at Home always. I know that's challenging, and I know that the complexities that are behind creating Roam Like at Home markets is not, are significant, but I would agree there with Intuk when they said that the final objective must be total elimination of roaming charges. Now, what are the reasons behind these fair use policies? Part of the debate throughout the past few months many have argued that fair use policies are needed to avoid fraud, to avoid consumers that are not being, legitimately disclosing where they reside or saying that they're going to reside in one place and they're spending the bigger part of the month in another place. If that's the reason, then we would argue that there are other mechanisms to avoid that fraud. We don't need to limit the use of Roam Like at Home in order to avoid that fraud, which should be avoided for sure. If the objective is to create this cost sustainability, which is mostly what we're talking about today, then from our analysis, it's wholesale caps and wholesale costs that need to go, not Roam Like at Home. Always assuming that what we want to create is a single market, of course. So, in short, the more fair use policies we have, the less real it is that we have abolished roaming. We could find ourselves in a few years talking about the fact that we have substituted our language, our terminology, and we stop talking about roaming caps and we start talking about FUP caps. Now, how funny would be that? Now, a few comments on if the fair use policies are to be implemented. Our analysis is that there should be an ambitious minimum level with a plan to make it, to reach 100% of the national domestic bundle that the consumer has in a few years, not too delayed. In the meantime, competition on those fair use policies should be enabled so that operators can also compete on that dimension. And then just two thoughts on the different types of limitations. If it's a limitation on time, if we are going to limit consumers' ability to use Roam Like at Home on a time basis, what is the base unit? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it months? Is it hours? And here, I think it's very important because it is my impression that the vast majority of the debate, we've been talking about consumers that go on holidays. It's not just about consumers that go on holidays. What about a consumer that resides in Belgium, works in the Netherlands, and goes to visit a friend in Germany, all in the same day? It's a possible scenario. That consumer also has the right to roam like at home. If that happens every day, if that happens every week, then he or she should be able to do that. If the limitations are on volume, then my question is with respect to what? Now, we've all had conversations about doing limitations on volume with, for example, respect to national averages. Now, that may be a very tricky issue because then we create geographical discriminations. It's the national average in Finland is not the same as the national average in Greece or Spain, and also the national average as compared to the person that is the lowest, has the lowest consuming level in that country and the maximum is also very different. So that could create very unfair situations between consumers as well. So our view there, for the time being at least, it would be that instead of national averages, we of course focus on limitations on volume with respect to each individual's consumption. And those are my first reactions. Thank you.
So thank you a lot, Mr. Beltrà. And to be very clear, so there are two occasions for providing input to BEREC. So now there is this relatively short time of 1 week to provide input for our internal work where we are preparing and working on our draft opinion and draft paper. So that draft document will be then discussed at the 4th plenary of BEREC this year, and that takes place on the 4th and 5th of December. And after that BEREC plenary meeting, so we will launch public consultation. And that public consultation will then allow you to properly take a look at the draft document and to provide your comments and views on that. So I think that it's a very good thing that you have 2 time slots to take a look at this issue and to provide your views and comments on this very important topic. So we have the last speaker of the session on roaming. So Mr. Scott Marcus, Director coming from VIC Consult. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yes, I work for VIC Consult, a research institute in Germany, and I am speaking for, remarkably enough, myself. These are personal views that I'm presenting. I would argue that where we are in the roaming process today represents a third of 3 phases. A first one with wholesale and price regulation began in 2007 and continues through the present. A second reflects the introduction of structural solutions enacted in 2012, first coming into effect supposedly in July of this year. And now we're entering a third phase, which I would characterize as the period of confusion. We sit at a time where the goals are fairly well understood. I would argue that the goals are appropriate and correct. We know where we want to go. We have considerable uncertainty how to get there and also whether we can get there in economically sustainable ways. That's precisely the reason why the exercise that that BEREC has just undertaken is so incredibly important. Ensuring that costs and prices remain aligned is absolutely crucial for sustainable design. Now, these are not new issues. At the point when roaming was first introduced into regulation in 2006 and 2007, there was very careful consideration of whether it might be possible to regulate only wholesale level or only retail. The concern was at the time that regulating only retail would run a substantial risk of prices going underwater, that is, falling below level of costs, in which case services would go off of offer. Conversely, regulating only at wholesale level ran substantial risk that we were simply moving around which mobile network operators profit and not necessarily flowing benefits down to consumers, which in fact is exactly what we saw for data roaming from 2009 to 2012. So at this point, we have to get it right, and getting it right implies coordination of wholesale and retail. That, I think, is the key point. It's important to look at the cost flows. This is a sketch from Erzsebet from a consultation document back in 2006. It's an unusually clear statement. What you have, of course, is a retail payment to the home network operator and then a wholesale payment from the home operator to the visited operator. Most people understand this. The next one is the one that very few people understand. That's the one about calls received. There is no equivalent IoT wholesale payment for calls received. Doesn't exist. The crucial point here is that the home network receives an MTR from the caller's network and pays an MTR to the visited network. That means that the difference in those MTRs is absolutely crucial to the home network's profitability for the service. And the question then is, what are the differences in Europe today? And the answer is, they're moving in the right direction, but they're still pretty big. The differences between many of the countries are on the order of 2 cents per minute. And the question then becomes, will operators in fact complete calls if they're taking a guaranteed loss of 2 cents per minute between some of the destinations? Half of the destinations, predictably, have prices that are underwater. Now, here, I think that the statement in the working group's document, in the BEREC document, excuse me, is correct, which is, in principle, I would agree that roaming policy shouldn't be driving MTR policy. MTR policy is a bigger issue. But I would respectfully make a suggestion here that I also made in a report for the Parliament last year, and that is that it might be time for us to seriously consider moving from asymmetric to symmetric regulation of termination rates. It's a rather meaningless charade to determine which operators have SMP in calls received. We know the answer, and the question is, are the costs now close enough that we could achieve a common rate for MTRs in Europe as well? It's a radical suggestion, but it's probably necessary to get those rates not necessarily to zero, but to get them very close to one another if we want to be able to get to roam like at home for calls received. Okay. So, just a couple of other points. I do work on this all around the world. I'd quickly note that there's a consultation in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. My team drafted the consultation document. It's much more of a roaming classic approach, Europe as it existed up to 2012. And there, what many people don't realize is that the 6 countries of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates, have had wholesale and retail price regulation in place since 2012. They've had a rather European system, but only for calls placed. And it works. If you get the coordination right between wholesale and retail, it works. Public consultation is out. The document puts forward a substantial expansion of wholesale and retail price controls, especially, of course, into data roaming, which is really the service of the future. One interesting feature that I think is especially noteworthy for BEREC is the very helpful cooperation that's existed between the GCC countries and BEREC. One of the features in that consultation is to begin a statistics collection in the region using exactly the same templates that are used for European data collection. This is a win for everybody. If we have the same data, we get cross-comparability. It's a Pareto improvement. Everybody benefits. I can say that the regulators of the GCC region were extremely happy with the cooperation from BEREC on this. No structural solutions, by the way. A last set of points relates to why do we do this in the first place? To an economist, we normally care about societal welfare. Societal welfare is both consumer welfare, producer welfare. What you want to do is improve the sum of the two. Simply changing prices moves welfare around. It also, though, changes the level of utilization thanks to price elasticity of demand. That's what you see in this Harburger triangle. It's the triangle that's really important here because it represents the reduction in deadweight loss. So that's all good, but the magnitudes have been computed. They're not all that big. A very good quantitative economist, Stefan Hernig, figured this out for Europe in the impact assessment for the 2012 roaming regulations, came up with savings relative to the 2009 prices of about 13 billion over a 3-year period. Call it 4.5 billion per year. It's a big number, but frankly, it's not that big a number. And important thing to bear in mind is the reason why we do this isn't just to produce these direct consumer benefits. The reasons have a lot more to do with regional cohesion and with the kind of benefits to business that Nick White was talking about earlier. It really has to do with spillovers into the broader economy, with the importance of being able to operate at a continental level with the best tools available. And by the way, I did the same analysis for the GCC countries. I would make the same statements there. Lots of papers available. Thank you very much for the time. It's the end of a long day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marcus. So that was the last intervention of this session, and now we have time for questions and comments. So please raise your hands and introduce yourself. I'm sure that this afternoon's session has raised a lot of issues and has given a lot of food for thought. So Yes, please.
Could I just ask those representing the operators that if 18 months is the minimum time required, are you saying that you have done absolutely nothing yet, even though you knew this was coming, or has some of the work required already been completed, although you still need more detail?
We are waiting for the details. I don't know, maybe you know the definition, but we're just waiting for the end of the discussion. Just starting doing things with IT, with systems. When you go to the IT people and the operator, real practice, you ask from the regulatory department, and I want to assess roam like at home. They answer back, what's roam like at home? We are not sure. We are not sure of the impact. And that's the dynamic. So to get a real deadline or how months we need to implement roam like at home, we need to know what's roam like at home. We need to know if the fair usage policy is a percentage of the allowance, it's 10 minutes, 1,000 minutes, and it's not so obvious. Especially if you don't work close to the IT people in the company. So it's not, we are not doing nothing at all. We are trying to shape how will roam like at home and fair usage policy will look like.
Frederik de Bakker from Telefonica. Just to add on that answer, perhaps, and we were not doing nothing. We were implementing roaming number 3 regulation until very recently. So I don't know if that helps you further. I take also the opportunity to make a comment, not a question, or it's more a plea to BEREC, because I think what we learned of the presentations today is that whole exercise may cause some losers and winners in function of the MVNOs, operators, if they are in southern countries and northern countries. It may also cause losers and winners between customers if they are travelers, frequent travelers, if they are not, if they're business travelers or not. So I think it's very important the work that BEREC is doing to making clear to policymakers, if they make decisions, they will have those consequences. Because otherwise, we will be blamed afterwards of the consequences of decisions that I don't say decisions is bad or good, but I think that it's really an important task of BEREC to make clear to policymakers that those decisions or those choices that they will have to make will have those and those effects on the markets. Thank you.
I'm Innocenzo Genna. I'm representing a group of Italian MVNOs. My question is to any of the speakers today, because they mentioned wholesale fair use. I did not understand how wholesale fair use works, especially if in the documents I read we are talking about fair use by week, by days, and so on. How do you have a wholesale for each customer? I don't understand.
Who wants to reply?
Yeah. I will try.
Yeah.
The wholesale fair usage policy is not obvious, and it said in the document it needs further analysis. So we can't give you any input on that. It's just on the radar, but no further detail. Sorry?
An idea, but we even don't know if it may ever work.
We don't know.
Okay.
If it works.
Thanks for the reply.
Yes, please, on the back row.
Okay. Yeah, Aurélie Doutrio from Orange. First of all, I wanted to thank you again, BEREC, for the transparency with stakeholders on such important issues. I also wanted to complete again the answer to the question of your question on what have we been doing. We have been implementing roaming free for sure, and also we have launched new offer on the market. If you look today at the offer of several operators across Europe, you will see that more and more we include roaming within our bundles. So the market is clearly moving. If I come back to the BEREC document, so I understand that you have 1 week to maybe contribute, so we will try to do so within that delay. We think it's a very good document in the sense that it's really described all the challenges that needs to be solved before Roam Like at Home can be implemented. So that's very important. In particular, we think that we completely support BEREC's view on the safeguards, the need for safeguard to avoid national market distortion. We also support BEREC in the timing. I mean, again, it's a question of we need to know all the rules before we can implement something, and we need then to adapt our IT system and our contracts. We also for sure welcome the solution or suggestion of BEREC on the decoupling obligation, meaning single MC and LBO do not have any sense in a Roam Like at Home world. So that's really important stuff. On retail, we understand that BEREC is thinking about fair use policy, a minimum fair use policy with flexibility for the operator. We think it is going in the right direction. However, when we speak about which safeguards to avoid that Roam Like at Home completely distort competitive national market, there we think that the solution will be more at wholesale level. And we think that we should ensure that to avoid national market distortion, we have wholesale caps that are at the levels that avoid that negative effect. We think that they should not be decreased to ensure that competition can play below and can already allow Roam Like at Home, as it is the case today. We think it's really important. Well, BEREC will have to assess the functioning of the wholesale market, to look at the current price applying within that market, not only the caps, but also the current price that the operator negotiate among themselves. So we understand that policymakers so far, I mean Commission, but also Parliament and Council have been thinking about a two-step approach to review the wholesale market afterwards. So we think that at that time, when will be that time, we will need a proper discussion on the wholesale market functioning and a consultation on any new suggestion to regulate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then there is another request for intervention, please, over there.
Yeah. So my name is Anna Bigot. I work for BEUC, so also on the French market. Well, to come back on the very first question, so it's quite important to know that in France we do have Roam Like at Home offers already, which are a bit different according to the different operators, but altogether it's like 35 days a year, and then with some volume cap for data, because just having a cap of time doesn't work. And so for as far as wholesale caps are concerned, we managed to have the Roam Like at Home offers with the current wholesale caps, so for us this is all right. But to come back to a more general issue, I think finally it was quite interesting and provocative from BEUC to say, what do we really mean from Roam Like at Home, because would it be in the end just fair use or much more? And this is something we don't know, and it would be interesting to know what are we really aiming at, or, I mean, as a political aim. For example, are our offers good enough, you know, like our fair use offers good enough on the French market? And so furthermore, it was very interesting to see, so in the BEREC document and in the week presentation, and yeah, ECTA also talked about that we really need to have converging MTRs, because this is one of the main issues for which we really need to find a solution before implementing a global Roam Like at Home offers. And there's another topic which has not been addressed and we consider as being quite important, is the fact of trying to find some kind of harmonization for numbering plans, because so in France we can very easily make a distinction between premium numbers and personal numbers, and premium numbers for which we have higher MTR. And in other countries, we sometimes don't know because sometimes the numbers are not different. And so sometimes it's really hard to know which one are the premium and which one are the personal numbers. And it does make a huge difference because the MTR are very different in this case. So we think this is an issue which really needs to be considered.
Yes, please.
Jörg Henkel for Deutsche Telekom. So first of all, I can agree to all the comments that have been made before. I think the BEREC document covers most of the really crucial points. So thank you for that, for considering all the aspects. A few comments from my side. In the BEREC presentation, I think the waterbed effects or the risk of potential waterbed effects are a bit overestimated. So I think you should always consider that the domestic mobile markets are highly competitive, and for most of the customers, roaming is not the decisive factor, whereas price or coverage or the network is. And I think simply saying that the introduction of Roam Like Home could lead to the effect that mobile operators would increase their domestic tariffs may be right in theory, but I think due to the massive competitive pressure that we have in the domestic markets, I think it's not a very realistic scenario. With regard to the, at the end of the BEREC document, there's one suggestion in order to adapt the transparency measures with regard to if we have fair use limits, that customers should be notified in real time or notified once the fair use limits are reached. I would like to please consider the technical capabilities with this. We have real-time systems for data. We have the data spending cap, which was introduced by a former regulation, but we don't have real-time systems, for example, for postpaid voice services. So simply saying that postpaid voice customers should be notified in real time with regard to the reaching of any fair use limits would be a massive technical implementation effort. So please consider these with regard to your proposals. And one last comment with regard to the fair use policies. I think fair use policies are important, but nevertheless we should always consider that Roam Like Home in general is a significant regulatory intervention in markets and business, and therefore this has to be appropriate in order to be legally justified. So having a fair use policy which would be too generous and would cover more or less the complete roaming behavior of the customers, and just including this in today's tariffs, which are calculated without the roaming costs inside, would be, I think, an inappropriate intervention. So therefore, this has to be considered, and there should be the possibility for operators to, once the fair use limits are reached, then to provide the customers with alternative roaming packages. And as my colleagues told before, there are very attractive roaming packages in the markets where for a small amount of money you can have roaming on daily or monthly basis. Roam Like Home is already there, and this should be also possible in future. So therefore the fair use limits need to be appropriate in this way. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Yes? Okay, please.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Andrea Cecchini from Wind. I have only 3 comments about this international roaming matter. The first one that around the legal certainty. I couldn't catch easily what is the real handling of the incoming calls. I mean, we see to the last European Parliament issuing, seems that incoming calls are not including in the roaming like at home threshold, roaming like at home volume. But I would like that in terms of legal certainty, this point should be addressed. The second point is about the wholesale the fact that, yes, to apply on wholesale a sort of fair usage volumes, fair usage policy at the wholesale level. I would suggest that to discourage this type of approach, because it's really hard to be applied, because a customer can change day by day, hour by hour, the network in the visited network. So I would sincerely discourage this type of approach. The third observation was about the fact to take into account the asymmetry of traffic. Different country means different types and volumes of traffic. Yes, thank you for your time, for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yeah, Ralf Capito from Vodafone. Also, we very much like the effort BEREC is doing at the moment, because we believe that some of the proposals have been rushed through and have not been very well thought through before actually policymakers made their decision. So this is actually the right time to go ahead with this. I just want to make 3 remarks. First of all, to Nick White, I want to know how many of your members actually start implementing stuff in your companies on the basis of proposals, which can still be changed. I think the CEO of any of this company would tell you off if at the end of the day the proposal changes again, and then you have spent millions of euros for something which is never going to happen. The second point on the wholesale, we have had some stakeholders in this room asking for lower wholesale rates. Of course, that seems to be the easy solution. We would seriously ask BEREC to consider the damages that you can actually cause by lowering the wholesale rates and taking away incentives of operators to invest in the networks. We've seen from your latest benchmark report that there is actually competition in the wholesale market, because the figures you see are below the caps, and we have seen no evidence so far that smaller operators can also get lower wholesale rates. And the last point I'd like to make is that was already made by the GSMA. One should really consider whether Roam Like at Home must apply to all tariffs, because there are operators out there which have, I don't know, 800 tariffs in their systems, which are legacy tariffs dating from 1996. And if you need to apply Roam Like at Home to all these tariffs, you're going to have considerable efforts and spend a lot of money. And we've seen in the past that offering a tariff like the Euro tariff to consumers who then can choose to have that tariff is a much better approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, comments? So I think that we have now preempted the topic for the moment, so thank you very much for very active participation in this session, and I now give the floor to Fatima to make the closing remarks. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to thank you, all of you, for joining us today and for helping us to discuss very important topics and for providing very interesting discussions and very valuable interventions. We started by going through the draft BEREC strategy for the next 3 years, as well as the draft BEREC work program for 2015. We took due note of your interventions today. We have heard things like more action and faster, work closer to the market, pay more attention to market developments, look ahead, be balanced, give priority to consumers, share objectives. And I can only say that we all agree with all your comments, because in fact, we would like to move faster. We would like to be able to reach conclusions in a much faster way, and we would like to have more time for forward looking, but sometimes we are not able as regulators to do this at the speed that we would really like. However, I think it's very good for us to have all of you pushing us in this direction. And I can only say that this was a very productive meeting, and I would like to remind you that since the strategy and the work program are under public consultation, you may also send us your written contributions until the 24th of October. Well, I don't need to remind you what we have been doing, but before lunch, we have discussed the draft BEREC guidance on the regulatory accounting approach to the economic replicability test. This is a very important discussion and intends to provide NRAs with information on how to conduct tests that we know that are complicated, they are complex, and of course, they are very important for the markets. This is a crucial tool for an appropriate implementation of the Commission recommendation, as you know, and it's very important to listen to you and to all your comments, and sometimes even to all the alerts that you give us in this approach. Again, we would like to underline that this document is also under public consultation, and we would like to receive your written comments on this subject as well. Well, and after the lunch, we had as a dessert the hot topic on the table, that is the international roaming. This is a very important subject. We are all very concerned about the impact of all this change in the market. We could see we have very different views. We all know that in these decisions there will be winners and losers. We heard words like timing, MTRs. We heard about avoid fast track. We heard about wholesale tariff regulation, waterbed effect, arbitrage concerns, the challenge for the Internet of Things, of the existence of the international roaming. So this is a very important discussion. We are working on this document, and of course we would like very much to receive your views on the questions that we launched. We don't have certainties on these issues. We are aware of all the problems that are related to these decisions, and every contribution that we will receive from you will be very important for our work. As incoming chair of BEREC, I can just tell you that it has been especially interesting to hear all your perspectives, different, in many cases very different. And as Goran said this morning, we are in the middle of a big change. I would say we are in the middle of a big storm. And this makes it even more important for BEREC to have a dialogue with all stakeholders. This is why I'm especially happy to have had so many participants today. And I'm looking forward for the next year for more interesting events where we would like to have your participation and to have your commitment for this discussion that has a single aim, that is the development of the sector. Next year, as the chair of BEREC, I hope that we will open the doors for these discussions, and I believe that we can, in these kind of meetings, we can all discuss in an open way the most important issues that are on the table, And of course, we need you to help all the NRAs, and also we want also to give some support to the European institution, giving our views on these special issues. But in the end of the day, as BEREC, we are here to support and defend the interests of the business and consumers in Europe. I'd like, once again, to thank all of you, and I wish you a safe trip back home. Thank you.